something special.
Well, I guess that's my turn to introduce you to TEDx Loughborough University 2025. I must admit, I was sat there for a moment enthralled by that video and almost forgot it was my turn to introduce you. And if you're sat there thinking, I don't recognize this guy's name from the running order, well, you'd be right. My name is Blake. I will be your host for this evening. I somehow talked my way into being in between all of these inspiring talkers today. My role will be to try and guide you and try and set the tone for you and maybe plant some seeds for thought in between our talkers today. I've worn many hats whilst I've been here at Loughborough University. I'm currently a master's student in the Wilson School in sports engineering. But along the themes of tonight's event, that the world can't wait, I couldn't wait to have my little swan song of my own and be up here. So I hope you don't mind me introducing myself and warming you up a little bit. I don't know just how cold it is outside at the moment, but hopefully you're all very comfortable. Before I do go on, though, I would like to run through a few housekeeping bits and a little bit of running order for you. So first things first, phones, if you would be so kind as to make sure that they are on silent, so as not to distract our speakers, because they have some fantastic things to share with you. Hate for that to be interrupted. If the fire alarm should go off at any point, fire exits, I'll do my best steward impersonation. They are. How's that? Pretty good? Unfortunately, I will not be coming around with a trolley of snacks. However, on that note, there will be several breaks and a main intermission for you guys to get some food, use the facilities, as well as LSU Sing and LSU Dance, giving you some entertainment to break things up and change the pace a little bit. Toilets are just towards the back, where the lovely staff are. Give us a wave, lovely staff. There you go. Fantastic. That takes the attention off me for a moment, which is great. When it comes to photography, also no flash photography would be fantastic. You would appreciate that a lot. And now that I've gone through all of the boring things, it's on with the show, because I'm sure you didn't come here to watch me talk about toilets and fire escapes. Now, I haven't heard a lot of these talks. And that's not because I'm rubbish at my job. It's because I wanted to genuinely share my excitement about the talks with you. And stand here and hopefully get you in the mood, as I am, to hear what they have to say. But our running order will include everything from the masculinization of black features and faces to inclusivity in design and ageism in women's health. I think there's absolutely tons to be excited about tonight. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is an award-winning creative director and storytelling architect who's an experienced teacher at RADA and Lambda, and with over 100 productions underneath his belt, he is no doubt someone that knows exactly how to tell a tale and the power of words. Now, when I was talking to this speaker, he said something as we were chewing the fat that really resonated with me. And he's a very quotable guy. I don't know if it's just the beautiful Irish accent, making everything sound a little bit more magical. And don't worry, I won't try and imitate that. But what he said to me was that he's spent his lifetime bringing other people's words to life. And when I asked him why he wanted to come here and talk to you all, he said that he asked himself the question, what if it was my script? What is it that the world can't wait to hear from me? What do I need to say? And another quotable thing that he dropped on me was that he didn't want this to feel like another made-to-order piece of art. Which I know, it's very quotable, isn't it? You guys should all write that down and make sure you credit him, however. So I love that that's what you're going to hear from him today. And without further ado, although I am terrified of the notes that he's likely going to give me on my performance today, I am equally excited to hear from Danica O'Brien on the... Sorry, I have the wrong title here. That's awful. What a mistake on my behalf. Do apologize, Danica. You'll have to forgive me. Containing Multitudes, the stories that make us.
Thank you, Blake. Hi, folks. Just going to make sure the mics are all good. Everybody can hear me down the back? Hear me down the front? Hear me on the left? Hear me on the right? Thank you. Tonight, this afternoon, perhaps, I want to talk about stories, and I might even tell a couple of stories, as Blake has alluded to. That is kind of my job. Stories are a kind of magic. They're the science that the brain does naturally. As we piece together our past and we imagine our future, it's stories that we use to understand who we have been, who we can be, and who we are now. Jonathan Haidt put it well when he said, "The human mind is a story processor, not a logic processor." Let me tell you a story. I'm 3 years old, and I live in a tiny village in the west of Ireland. I'm on my tricycle, and I'm running away from home. Nobody understands me. Nobody sees me. A tiny, curly-haired hero on the foothills of a voyage to discover who he's really meant to be until he gets scared and goes back home. So life can be tough when you're 3. But our lives are like a collection of short stories. And as we piece them together, I use a couple of key questions when I approach a story in my work. And those are, what is the writer doing with this story? And what kind of story is it? What was I doing with the first story? Well, I was setting the scene, I suppose. So let's go back to the boy. I'm 5 years old, and I'm flying across the rooftops of Bayswater in London, where I now live as of last week. There's other children around. I don't know them. I think my sister is up ahead. I'm free. There are rooftops. There's adventure. It's a city I don't understand, but I'm there. And my mother is here somewhere, but I know my father isn't. I'm the man of the house now. What kind of story is the boy in? Be a rags to riches story? He's a long way from riches in what we would call now temporary accommodation. Maybe it's a coming-of-age narrative, but he's 5. He's a little young for that. This boy, I think, is in a kind of a Western. And I know that sounds odd, so bear with me. You see, Westerns always happen on the frontier, in that space between the wilderness and civilization. They're about the hope for something resolved, their hope for order in a world of chaos. And childhood is always on the frontier. Children need the world to make sense. But every time they think they have a handle on it, something comes along, a bigger kid, an adult, an experience, and it tells them that they're wrong. The world can be a daunting place. I'm 6 years old, and I'm in the playground of another new school. And I'm standing in a little alleyway between two tall buildings, and I'm scared. I don't know anyone. I don't know what to do. So I call upon, to find strength, I call upon the cartoon that I watch on a Saturday morning at home, the Thundercats. And I call upon the power of 10 tigers. And I walk out into the open space with my duffel coat as a cloak. What kind of story is this? Kind of an urban mythology, maybe a superhero narrative. Superhero stories are about vulnerability, the need to find power, the need for moral certainty. And what's the writer doing with this story? Well, he's probably driving at something. You see, I think from a very young age, we develop this habit of seeing ourselves as if within a story, or as a story. And it's not a habit that we let go of easily, I think. But young children in particular have a loose sense of the difference between the imagined and the real. It's why when I say to my kids, so guys, I think I might fly to work today. Has anybody seen my wings? And my 8-year-old might roll her eyes and say, oh, Dad. But my 5-year-olds, yes, there's 2 of them, they are pretty sure that I'm not going to do that at the wise old age of almost 6, but they're not certain. They live in an overlapping world of stories, all imagined to some extent, all real to some extent. But as we often ask ourselves, what is reality? Welcome to the sci-fi genre. What is real? Oh God. Feedback is real. What is real? You've been living in a dream world, Neo. But when does it end, this blurring of the real and the imagined? I'm 9 years old, and I'm sitting in a car outside my grandmother's house. It's about 2 miles from the scene of the tricycle escape. And I'm with my father, and he asks me to reach down under the seat and pick up what's there, and I do so, and I find a 6-bullet revolver. He says to me that if anything happens to him, it's mine. And as I hold it cold in my hand, I think, this is heavy. I don't know if I can carry this. What kind of story is the boy in now? An action, perhaps? An attempt to be the hero that he sees his father as? Or perhaps he's an innocent in the early scenes of what may unfold to become a horror. And what's the story about? Is it about a gun? Well, that would place it in action or even thriller. Or maybe it's about realizing that your father might die one day, will die one day, could die one day very soon. That places us firmly in horror. Horror is rooted in the fear of death. It's the most primal genre. It's a genre we all visit from time to time. But death in stories can also be a metaphor for change, for transformation, for the end of something that perhaps we didn't want to end, like childhood. Childhood has to end. Some of us here may still be mourning its passing. But let's bring the child, as childhood does have to end, into adulthood. And let's go to a story now from a romance, though not the scene any of us aspire to be in. I'm 24 years old, and I'm sitting on a bed in Stratford-upon-Avon, where I'm achieving a career ambition as an assistant director at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Across from me, on the bed, sits my fiancée, with her engagement ring in her hand, and she says, "I can't do this anymore." I say, "This?" She says, "Us." And in the silence afterwards, as I see fully formed futures melt before my eyes, homes that will now not be nested, children that will now not be born, holidays and happinesses that will now not materialize, I think in a moment of rare clarity, well, it was just an idea. And that's what the future is, isn't it? An idea, a story. If that was a romantic comedy, that scene would come about 3/4 of the way into the movie, and of course they would get back together at the end, probably in the pouring rain. But it's not that kind of story. Perhaps it's memoir. Perhaps it's all memoir. I want to finish today with this genre, memoir. It's a fascinating genre. Memoir, ironically, is not about the past. Memoir uses the past in order to figure out who you are now. So who am I now? I'm 43 years old. I'm a married father to 3 daughters. And for 20 years, I mostly directed stage plays. Perhaps I needed to sit outside of the story rather than be in it, but it's a naive ambition. There's nothing outside of the story. In my 20s, someone once said to me that at that time, I only told stories about how I was the best. Perhaps that's why she didn't marry me. But those stories, they were my protection. They were my shield. They were my duffel coat cloak. But the beauty of memoir, and we're all in the business of memoir, we're all in the business of figuring out who we are from who we have been. The beauty of memoir is that we have a lot of agency. We can choose how to tell our stories. We can choose what they're about. We can choose what stories to bring forward and keep telling and give space to. And we can choose what stories to leave behind, the ones that don't serve us anymore, the ones that might be holding us back. I hope that now I tell a broader range of stories in my own life. I hope that I can be weak as well as strong, that I can have failed as well as succeeded, that I can be lost as well as found. I like the words that Walt Whitman wrote, and I want you to hear them as well. He wrote, "I am large, I contain multitudes, and so do we all." So I want to leave you with these questions from my world, from my work. And they are, what kinds of stories do I tell about myself to other people and to myself? What am I doing with those stories? And what are those stories doing with me? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you guys for applauding as well. I didn't point it out earlier, but that is very much encouraged. I'm sure it's going to come perfectly naturally, as all of our talks this evening deserve a massive round of applause. Thank you, Donica, for that. That was fabulous. I found myself sitting there thinking, well, how do I measure myself? What do I know about myself? Is it the stories I tell myself? So it's very thought-provoking. Thank you for that. Now, our next speaker solidified my imposter syndrome, People talk badly about imposter syndrome, like, no, you should believe in yourself, yeah, shoot for the stars. But in fact, as I was reading sort of bio and talking to her, there were more accomplishments than I have time to list, and it very much confirmed my imposter syndrome that I should definitely be here as a jester rather than making a talk. Because this next speaker, not satisfied with simply being a highly internationally renowned competitive cycler, she is a triple world record breaker for her 3,600 nautical mile row across the ocean. I'll say that again, across the ocean. Okay, I thought that was going to get a much bigger woo, because I don't know about you, 3,600 nautical miles. I don't know the difference between a mile and a nautical mile, but I can tell you I can't do 6 rowing. And I don't mean sailing, but rowing. Yeah, let us sink in for a minute. I still have more. She was also recognized by BBC Breakfast for her Inspiring Women Leaders podcast. It's pretty good. And not least of all, fairly recently, has become an officer in the British Army. And, I mean, you don't have to salute. I don't think you wouldn't want... No. Okay. But your ears should certainly pay attention for this next one, because she did, in fact, return from deployment just to be here to speak to you. So I don't know about you, but I feel pretty honored. Now, that to me sounds like a pretty unshakable person, right? Someone that's accomplished all of that. But listen carefully. I was fascinated to hear her talk about what she's going to bring to you and how life can kind of hit you sideways in ways you don't expect, things you weren't prepared for when preparing for 3,600 miles. But without further ado, I bring you Zara Laughlin with What 97 Days at Sea Taught Me About Coming Home.
I'm just going to wait for the mics. We're all good? On the 1st of February, I set 3 world records rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, aged 21. I had just traveled just under 4,500 miles in 97 days, 9 hours, and 21 minutes. It was the most incredible but mentally challenging thing I've ever had the chance to do so far in my life. But I had absolutely no idea how hard it would be coming home. My crossing was an experience of many, many firsts, but probably most surprisingly, I got to see my first fish in the ocean. And I also had to get over my fear of water and swimming, which arguably I should have done before I left, because every other day you have to get in the water to clean the underside of the boat. It soon became one of my favorite times of the day, and especially if I got to see something swim by on those calmer days. But the water wasn't always a friend. I had some particularly stormy weather that gave me a capsize and left me badly swollen and bruised, but it also broke my primary phone, which had all of my music, podcasts, and audiobooks on, meaning I had the last 2 months of my completely isolated crossing in complete silence. Yet every single day I was at sea, I felt so lucky to be there, knowing I was crossing the world's 2nd largest ocean using the power in my legs. And I got to see the world properly, and it was so pretty. And then, after 97 long but very fulfilling days, I hit land as a 3-time world record holder. I was the first woman to ever row from mainland Europe to mainland South America, the youngest woman to solo row across any ocean, and the youngest person to row this route by, he was more than double my age. And I got to land, and on my crossing, I had become very good at becoming kinder to myself. Ocean rowing is the first sport I've ever done in my life that is so weather dependent. If you're in a rowing boat and the weather's against you and it's strong, it really doesn't matter how strong you are, you're going to go with the weather. And so I had to become better at setting realistic goals and then being okay when I couldn't meet them. And on some days say, I tried really hard and I couldn't do it, but try again tomorrow. And that might sound like a really small change to do, but it was completely new to me. And instead of jumping to the conclusion that I'm not good or fast or strong or clever enough. And it made it a lot easier to be around myself. And when you're the only person nearby, that's absolutely essential. It also made it easier to then push myself more. I had some horrendous weather, and I had days of going backwards, knowing, I mean, you row backwards, but knowing I was actually losing progress. And I absolutely loved it. But then I hit land, and I got to talk to and hug and see the people that I'd missed so much. And one of the first feelings I felt was one of disappointment in myself, because I'd missed out on taking the outright speed record by less than a day. And it completely flooded my mind, and it really tainted my finish as more of a dissatisfying moment than a joyous one. All I could do was think about all of the what-ifs and if-onlys you could imagine. What if I'd left a few days earlier in that better weather? Or if only I chose to go this way around instead of the other way around? Or what if I just rode half an hour more that one day? And that was a very hard feeling to go through, because I'd worked so hard to get to land, and that was my only goal. And then I got there, and that wasn't enough anymore. And it took me less than an hour of being back on land to lose all of that self-kindness I had worked so hard to be better at. I reverted right back into who I was before I left, when I was so goal-oriented that the outcome was all that mattered. Suddenly, it didn't matter to me that I had those bad weather conditions that had me ready to call the Coast Guard if I got blown within 50 meters of the cliffs of the Canaries. It didn't matter that I had weather that had me zigzagging through the water in any semi-helpful direction I could manage, days when I was losing an entire day of progress in a total of 3 hours of rest, despite using my sea anchor, days when I was physically exhausting myself to stay exactly where I was. And I had that every day for the first 35 days. I remember calling my coach and having to reassure him and say, I've got everything under control. Because everybody around, well, not around me, everybody on land was starting to think that this challenge was too ambitious, and it was too dangerous, it was taking too long, and I'd run out of food if I continued. Pre-departure, I was aiming to finish within 60 days. I took 90 days of food just in case. It took me 97 days. And then I got there, and suddenly none of those problems mattered anymore, because I'd lost something that wasn't even a race, something that I hadn't even thought of 6 months prior to do. And initially, upon my return, I was really trying. I had days when I would let my body recover, and I would eat and eat, and then one day it just all stopped. I stopped eating for days at a time because I started being so constantly overwhelmed that I was just sick. I couldn't sleep through the night, even with sleeping medication, because on my row, I never slept for more than an hour and a half, and that was on a good day, because you learn to wake up to the slightest change in water hitting the boat or of the boat rocking. I remember I went for my first run the morning after I finished, and I was so looking forward to running. I used to be a really good runner. I loved running long distance, and it was something I was really looking forward to doing when I got back. And I could run 1.5 kilometers, because I'd lost the muscle that's responsible for how your foot hits the floor and pushes you along, that lets you walk, run, and jump, because I hadn't been able to step more than 3 steps in 3 months. And that really wasn't helped, actually, when I was bitten by a barracuda just a week away from the finish, and it left 35 bite marks on my foot that bled for nearly a month. And people came up to me and told me they hoped their daughters grew up to be like me because I'd done this one thing. And people called me driven and determined, and I thought if any of them saw me in the months after I'd finished, they would have changed their minds because I coped so badly with coming home. Something that I wasn't prepared, I didn't even consider was going to be a challenge. Because if you're going to struggle with either being alone at sea for nearly 100 days or living the life that you used to live, surely it should be the former. Within a week of finishing, I was back here, back at uni, finishing my degree in physics, and back to normal training, and it was like nothing had happened, even though every time I stood still, I would fall over because I hadn't got my land legs back, or that I couldn't even stomach a full meal. And it took me more than half a year to sleep through the night. Today, I have been on land 9 months, and I have become a bit better at showing myself a similar kind of logical reflection I had during my crossing. I've tried to see every day of being home as a win, even if I've had failures. And I think that this is the part of extreme adventure that is really rarely spoken about, the coming home. And I think it's also the part to a lot of our triumphs that goes unspoken. We all train and work so hard to get to where we want, whether you're graduating, or you've just got a promotion at work, or you're training for your first marathon. You enjoy the chase, and then you get there, and then it's just over. And that slump can be really difficult to go through. Some days, I'm the girl that set world records rowing across the Atlantic. And some days, I'm just trying to adjust to my new career in the British Army. But absolutely everything has its own challenges, and they all really matter. And I think that we should talk about this more. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm going to be talking about a special forest village called Mendeleka. It's important to note that this forest has managed to be able to, without slashing down and cutting down its trees, become prosperous and preserve its forest. This seems improbable, almost mythical, but it is real. Now imagine I've given you £1 million. What would you do with that million? Probably you'd start spending it, maybe on a nice sports car, maybe on some nice VIP tickets to Bon Jovi next year in 2026, or maybe even on an extravagant holiday. But what if I told you instead of letting your money dwindle, you decided to invest that money and you decided to live off of its returns? If you had, let's say, a 5% annual yield, you'd earn £50,000 every year indefinitely, allowing your capital to remain intact and your fortune and freedom to last forever. A dominant economic model that we currently have in society is the idea that in order to become prosperous, we have to increase consumption, or that we have to focus on the idea of extraction as meaning growth. And alternatively, this has led us to think that in doing so, we should focus on extracting more from nature and from ourselves, when alternatively, there is a better solution, which the tribal village Mendeleka have managed to share. In doing so, they've managed to go from poverty to security, all by managing to focus on ensuring that their village has the sustainable needs that it does. And this is their story. So Mendeleka is a tribal village with a population of about 400 people in Maharashtra, India, in the Gadchiroli district. It includes having largely forested land, and in doing so, there's also been the availability of ensuring that by the state there is increased pressures on not only extraction but on their population. It's really important to note that Mendeleka has, for a prolonged period of time, focused on the idea of ensuring that they're able to make sure that their forest is remaining sustainable through food, through water, through ecological and forest conservation, as well as focusing on the idea of ensuring sustainable growth. It's really important to note the idea that through this village in 2009, they had the great opportunity by the India Forest Rights Act of 2006 to become independent and own their community ownership of their forest, which in itself is a feat. I think if it was any other community forest, they'd feel as if they won the lottery. But alternatively, most villagers would think, why don't we just cut down our trees, sell them, and instead decide that it is time for us to make a profit? But Mendeleka instead decided what we're going to do is oppose this path, and we're going to treat our forest as if it's a principal asset. So keeping that idea of what is a principal asset, it's essentially having your initial asset that is never spent, and instead they decided to keep and use their interest. And the interest in this case is the idea of their bamboo, their fruit, their leaves, and their trees. And in doing so, they've managed to have such a sustainable and amazing model for their forest. I think it's also really amazing to note how all of these decisions are made unanimously, and no, not in the majority, but unanimously, which in itself is an amazing feat. Looking on from that, we can consider how amazing they've managed to generate their revenue. Today, they earn around 1 crore every year, which is around £90,000, which is amazingly impressive. And following on from that, they've managed to make their forests denser, they've managed to keep their streams returning, and they've also managed to make their wildlife come back, which is amazing. And following on from that, it's great to consider how this was considered impossible by many. And in doing so, they've made sure that they've had long-lasting prosperity while keeping their environment intact. Now let's take a pause and look at this from an economic perspective. And the economic theory that I'd like to share with you today is the idea of the tragedy of commons. This is a really interesting idea to consider how, because in society we think if multiple people have, or all people have access to a certain resource, they're then going to think this is an opportunity for us to capitalize and take as much of it as we possibly can. And as a result, people will act in their own self-interest. They'll decide that they'll overuse a resource and then it will lead to its depletion. But alternatively, This has led to increased government control and resulted in people ensuring that they're unable to access their own resources and communities and make their own decisions. However, I believe this is kind of an old school way of thinking. To assume that people and communities aren't able to make their own decisions seems a bit behind. Consider Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom. She too had the idea that this seems a bit behind and then there are ways in which we can change this, and she saw an opportunity to make that change. An alternative proposition instead is considering how when she studied different communities, including herders in Switzerland or even villagers in Japan, how she looked at their ability to make their own decisions and they can make sustainable change and manage their wealth, ensuring that they do stick to making their own rules internally. She saw a variety of elements that ensured this level of prosperity, one of which being the idea of ensuring their user and resource boundaries, ensuring that there was trust within their village, and also ensuring, and most importantly I think, that there should be some level of design and internal recognition of these rules and these ideas internally. And Mendeleeka has managed to absorb all of these ideas. And actually, it's gone a step further and had its own interesting concept. And that includes the idea of an intergenerational contract. Now you may be wondering, what is an intergenerational contract? And this is an idea where they're not just thinking about who the present is, but they're also thinking about who the future generations are, the members of the Mendeleeka community that they will never meet. Let's think ahead maybe 7 generations from now. That is approximately 175 years. Imagine if universities, if organizations thought on that timescale and how impressive that would be for them not to just think about the next quarter or the year to go, but instead to push their mark and see how they will impact other people they've never met before. It's also interesting to consider how they are making all of these decisions unanimously and reaching a consensus, which in itself is pretty crazy to think about. I mean, how do they not end up with continuous debate all the time and come to a conclusion? Well, to that I give you their Gram Sabha. And this in itself is a village assembly that they have. And through this village assembly, they're able to make sure that everyone in their village has an equal voice. All members who are adults have an equal voting range. In the Mendeleeka village, every Menda household has two adults at least attending the meetings. And in doing so, they're able to ensure that there is equal voices, everyone is understood, and people's ideas are actually listened to. This is a really brilliant way in which they've managed to foster collective stewardship, and they've also managed to develop collective efficacy, the idea of ensuring everyone's ideas are seen together and truly understood. And they're able to meet their destiny and prosper. It is also interesting to consider how, through this village, we're able to see the impact on how does this relate to us. I mean, they are, after all, a small village of 400 people. How can we really translate that into what we're experiencing in a university or even in a global corporation? And to that I pose there is a really interesting element to look out for. The fact that, let's look at an organization. They have pretty much quite a short-term focus and they're pretty much focused on results. Whereas Mendeleeka has decided, let us instead consider how our people, our culture, and our resources are actually our principal asset. And instead of letting them diminish and treating them as if they're expendable a resource, we instead will use them and preserve them. And this is really powerful. If organizations decided to do this, it would be a brilliant way for them to show long-term thinking, building trust, nurturing their employees, and also ensuring a future of greater success, actually. I think that going forward, it's really important to note that through Mendeleeka, we're able to see how this can be translated into our lives. A really brilliant mark as well to look at is how, by channeling this through organizations, we're able to go broader and see beyond the economics and understand how do we actually build better humans, which after all is one of the themes of tonight. And by building better humans, I truly mean how Mendeleeka has enabled that their community and their people are able to become more conscientious citizens. Through their ability to have collective decision-making, they've ensured empathy. By being able to focus on elements including their generational planning, they've ensured foresight. And by ensuring that they're able to focus on the planet and others around them, they've ensured that they're generating humility. And these are really important and powerful qualities in a person to have. Going forward as well, their leadership is really brilliant because they've identified that it's not about control, it's about the idea of preserving and responsibility. They've also highlighted how governance is about trust and it's about respect, another really important element that they focused on. Pushing forward, Mendeleeka is also brilliantly identified that beyond that, they've seen how, while trust and respect are important qualities, they've identified that over time, it actually helps people not only have a deeper connection with the planet, with themselves, but with the others around them. And this is truly remarkable. So I'm going to leave you on a note after this to focus on how we can kind of push this idea of sustainable freedom in the future. And truly what I mean by sustainable freedom is deep, meaningful freedom, where we're all able to understand and have a connection with everyone around us and not exhaust our resources. It is one thing to want to push yourself to the limit. You can burn out and you can only do it once. You can cut down your whole forest, but it can only happen once. And after that, what is the consequence? A slowly delay to depletion. It's not an effective solution. And instead, Mendeleeka has come up with this brilliant philosophy of ensuring protecting their landscape and protecting their people. They could cut down a tree this year, they could cut down a tree next year, and they could in fact cut down trees within the next century. But they know how to do it because they've built continuity into their prosperity. A really important idea that I think we can all take forward. Building on that, let's consider this university, let's consider Loughborough. And here, our forest is our knowledge, our ability to have collected and protected our curiosity and our inquiry, and how we can allow those ideas to flourish in the future for people. And leading on from that, organizations, their forest is their people. By having an ability to connect with different people, having built on your care, your culture, your collaboration, you will ensure great success and growth, a really powerful message that they can be an example of. And thirdly, looking at the idea of people. What is our forest? Looking at the idea of relationships, looking at our self-purpose, looking at our needs and our goals and our aims. These are all our forest, and by renewing these, we're really truly being able to allow ourselves to flourish and thrive in society. And together, our planet is our forest, and by treating it with kindness, with integrity, with respect, we're truly able to push forward and ensure that we reap the rewards. Mendeleeka has managed to aim and gain sustainable freedom. And the question I'd like to leave you with tonight is, can the rest of the world? Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. That was truly impressive. I think, if I'm honest, when I read her background, I was kind of hoping I'd get a children's story on finances. I certainly need that explaining to me like I'm a 6-year-old. But to have that scope to talk about something so diverse like that, so different from her bio and her background is really incredible. And I hope you've taken something away from that I think hopefully all of you can apply a little bit of sustainable thinking into everything you do. It's not just for engineers or product designers or construction, it's for all of us. Now, our next student is again a Loughborough own student. She's a graphic design and communications student. And this person has done wonderful things in segueing their creativity into philosophical takes on politics and society. And I must say, on a personal note, I don't know if you can tell, but as a member of probably every privileged majority, it would be easy for someone like me not to relate to certain topics on gender, race, and intersectionality, or to know the struggle of fitting in or feeling comfortable in your own skin. Though, as this next speaker put it to me when I spoke to her, she said, the personal is political, which I thought, you know, Danica's not the only one that can give quotable statements. That was a pretty great one. And it really stuck with me. And certainly, with the state of the world at the moment, I feel like all of us could do with paying attention and listening a little bit more to our next speaker, giving us a little bit more perspective, a little bit more tolerance, and a little bit more empathy. So, I give you Jola Aji Baye and her talk, Why My Dad Said No to Wigs.
Fun fact about me, I used to be bald. Now that is obviously not me. That is courtesy of my Nigerian boarding secondary school, where we used to cut our hair because it was too distracting. And though an exaggeration, bald perfectly encapsulates exactly how I felt during these very formative years of mine. I had this association of shame with my natural hair, followed by the incessant urge to cover it up. And sure, I was in school 9 months out of 12, but there were moments, events, outings where I just wanted to feel beautiful. And in my year 12, I was selected to go for Model UN, and my school was going to let us to wear wigs. I was really excited, and so were my peers. They were talking about their makeup, their outfits, their hair, and I was thinking about it too. I mean, I thought about the length, the curl, the color. And then I actually got around to asking my dad to purchase one, and he said no. And naturally, in a situation like this, you would probe for answers. So I asked him why, and he told me that he doesn't want me to depend on Eurocentric standards to feel beautiful. Now, I, at 16 at the time, wasn't trying to hear this lesson my dad had to teach me. I just wanted to look nice, like the rest of my peers. My friend gave me that. Shout out to her. He'd always bring up, when we'd have this argument, well, your mom's beautiful. She doesn't wear wigs. And yes, my mom has been wearing her hair short since about 2016. And he's right. My mom is the epitome of femininity, even in the traditional ways that they tell us to be. She's soft-spoken, polite, emotional, sweet. My mother is the first time I ever knew what a woman was. But I didn't want to look like her. And it's a strange thing to admit. I mean, obviously, my mom is beautiful. But the women I looked up to, the Disney starlets and the Disney princesses, they were all blonde, occasionally brunettes, even more occasionally redhead, but never black. My game avatars reflected this. I could never center a black girl on any of these narratives I was role-playing. And honestly, the first time I think I ever saw this softness explicitly depicted in a black character was Rue. Rue is the District 11 tribute of the Hunger Games, popular YA franchise, which I'm sure a lot of you recognize. When Amandla Stenberg was announced to play her, people were really pissed, really pissed. She was explicitly described in the book as dark brown, but I guess people got confused because she was described to have the exact same stature as Prim, who, as you can see, is white and blonde. And I was confused because she wasn't even that dark brown in the movie. Like, I thought she would look like me, to be honest, but people thought she would look more olive or tan. What I found interesting about this discourse was the indisputable racial profile of her district partner, Thresh. That's Thresh. He was described in the book as menacing, bulky, scary, aggressive. That's the image of blackness we're familiar with. That's the image of blackness that they were expecting with a Rue like this. That was the characterization they expected her to have. But instead, Rue was an innocent, fragile, soft little girl. And not just this, but the very image, the very symbol of that innocence. And the fans didn't believe that. They felt that no black girl would be worth starting a rebellion for. No black girl would ever garner that much sympathy. No black girl was worth mourning or protecting. And to some degree, they do have a point. In 2020, Megan Thee Stallion was allegedly shot by Tory Lanez, allegedly. And the internet was in flames. There were jokes, there were memes. People called her a liar, a snitch, anything but a victim, which is what she was, you know. The vitriol towards black women, obviously, extends far beyond fiction. And she's not the only person that has experienced such allegations of being a man, which is the craziest thing to me. I mean, genuinely, if Megan Thee Stallion is a man, then the rest of us stand no chance. I don't know where this came from. I mean, it's a trend with black women saying that they're transgender or they're manly. Michelle Obama, a black woman who needs no introduction, has faced these allegations for years. Serena Williams, Caster Semenya, Francine Niyonsaba, all sports stars that people don't believe should be in women's sports. People want to protect women's sports from these women. Casual TikToks with multiracial friend groups. The TikTok comments will turn the black girls into bodyguards. Oh, I know they don't play about you. The implication of such allegations and stereotypes is that you cannot be a woman and possess certain features. Broad shoulders, broad noses, height, visible muscle, deep skin tones, coarse hair, all of which in any other context would simply just be human variation. But in a Western lens, through a Western lens, where black and brown people are never centered, they've been coded as masculine. I will never forget the first time I went to class with my natural hair out. And I feel like this is a statement that no one else has to say. No one that's, doesn't have an afro. No one has to think about the fact that you've never seen a black girl in the UK walk around with her afro. Now I have, but when I first came, I didn't. And my hair had been growing out for some time, so I was genuinely proud of it. I went to class, the comments started, some people were intrigued. Some people made Black Panther jokes, which I still get to this day, and I think they're very ridiculous and tired. But the comment that stood out to me came from this guy on the business pathway. And you guys know how men that study business are. He told me that I look like a man. And that really, really, really affected me. That really stuck. And so I started to overcompensate. Bigger earrings, tighter clothes, mascara every single day. I softened my voice when I talked. All things I thought would assert my femininity to the world. I recall a conversation I had with this other girl that I did foundation with. She was talking to the same business pathway guy, one other friend that she had, and, they were talking about black women in the UK, their fixation with wigs, their obsession with makeup, their need for false eyelashes. How it's not respectable, it's fake. And I thought, isn't that unfair? Isn't this exact hyper feminine presentation exactly the thing that would have saved me from being a man, from looking like a man, rather? I wonder if there's any other group of people who has their aesthetics criticized to the same degree, to the same level. Anything that black women on a large scale enjoy is criticized and deemed, not cool, not beautiful. The UK black girl aesthetic, characterized by heavy makeup, dramatic eyelashes, and a bright under eye, which, by the way, I think is overhated, sleek hairstyles, and baby hairs. People critique black women in the UK for their lack of originality and their reliance on artificial enhancements to feel beautiful. And I think that's unfair, because what happens to me when I don't assimilate? For centuries, and though femininity, the associations with it have changed over time, femininity has always been centered around whiteness. In arts, in film, in media, the looser your hair, the paler your skin, the softer your features, define how feminine you're perceived to be. The proximity you have to this whiteness is what would affect this perception for many different groups of people, and it affects different demographics differently. Non-Black women of color and Black men. It was announced that the Children of Blood and Bone novel, which is another popular YA book, guys, I like to read. It's another popular YA franchise. It was announced that it was going to be adapted into a movie. And the casting announcement came out sometime around early this year. I can't remember, to be honest. But it had a lot of controversy. This is the royal family of Orisha, characterized by their light copper complexion, except for one black sheep who faces the beratement of their mother for their mahogany complexion. And I know what you're thinking, poor guy, right? That must suck. But I actually just described the princess, Amari. And now you guys are probably thinking, am I being gaslit? That's clearly a guy. Well, let's zero in on the siblings. This is Princess Amari and Prince Inan. Princess Amari, characterized by her mahogany skin tone, obviously, faces colorism in the movie. It's integral to our story arc. And naturally, Amandla Stenberg, who I'm sure you guys are surprised came up twice, was criticized for being too light for the role. And given the context of the novel, that Inan doesn't face similar beratement from his mother, that he's of the noble class, wouldn't it make more sense for him to be light-skinned and for her to be dark-skinned? Now, obviously, the fault is not with the actors themselves, but it does correlate with the Hollywood preference for dark-skinned actors and light-skinned actresses. But why? Here's the media paradox. It is as much a reflection of our society as it conversely shapes it. By depicting blackness, by depicting dark skin as the standard for hypermasculinity, it defines that hypermasculinity is equal to dark skin. And that's why a strong, capable character such as Inan, captain of the guard, is more convincing as a dark-skinned man, and why his sister, Princess, is more convincing as a light-skinned woman. It's why in movies like The Woman King, where the women are agile, strong, stoic, aggressive characters, they are riddled with a dark-skinned cast. Suddenly, Hollywood has a plethora of dark-skinned actresses, which I never even knew about. One of the weirdest things about coming to the UK was this new hyper-awareness of my race that I had never experienced before, and how it impacts my behavior. One of the first conversations I had with this guy, some other guy, not the business pathway guy, he had referred to the UK Black women as beasts. And that made me extremely uncomfortable. But it sent a message and I got it. And I decided that I would act differently so I wouldn't be characterized with the same ghetto, loud, aggressive personality. But I quickly realized that nothing I was going to do would change this. A different night, I went out with some of my acquaintances and I wasn't feeling my best. And I was trying but failing to be stoic and hide this fact. But I had a big frown on my face. And one of the guys I was with noticed this. He calls me and he makes a joke about how I'm going to kill him. And he follows up by asking, Jola, why are you so angry all of the time? But I'm not. I'm not angry all of the time. I'm told by my friends that I'm extremely energetic and vivacious, talkative to a fault. I'm literally always smiling. So where did he get this information from? And that's when I realized that all of my emotions, my passion, my sadness or joy or whatever I did, was always going to be reduced to angry and aggressive. And it was a visceral frustration. I was so over it. And the worst part is that it's not going to stop here, you know. Our current political climate, with the growing anti-immigrant sentiment, the growing hate towards people of color, the fact that this is a decades-long issue, it seems that we are in a never-ending cycle of having to prove ourselves. And that's when I realized that our sense of self has never, ever, ever been more powerful, important, or urgent. And not just self-acceptance. For creatives such as myself, this means self-centeredness, centering Black women in every single kind of narrative, decentering narratives that do not serve us. Terms like UK Black Beast, UK Beast, only exist to keep us down and police our emotions, our expression. The standard woman is beautiful, with Eurocentric features and a dainty, docile, delicate demeanor. She exists to maintain power structures and social hierarchy. She is rigid, and all she does is constrict. Not every woman is designed to be a standard woman. Femininity isn't designed to look a certain way. Standard doesn't mean real. It just means palatable. And your femininity wasn't made to be digested. My femininity has texture like my hair. My femininity has depth like my skin. My femininity has resonance like my voice. And in a world so focused on flattening us, our depth, our texture, our resonance has never, ever, ever been so needed. Our world was not designed to be flat. If there's one thing I want everyone to take away from me today, it's this. Do not trade authentic for palatable. Do not strive for standard. Strive for self. Strive for real. And lastly, to women of color, to Black women, your passion, your expression, your identity, your aesthetics, your hair, your clothes, your voice, your existence is yours and entirely yours to define. Whether that means existing with an afro, a wig, or a buzz cut. Thank you.
That was sensational. I think that was incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So now we're going to take a short intermission and give you a chance to have some food and eat and mingle. Though we will be recommencing and starting again at around 6:25. So if you could join us back then, you'll have a little bit of time to think over and discuss some of the talks we've had so far. Thank you very much. Let's do this. I was mid-jive over in the corner there when that song ended. I'm very disappointed. But I hope you've all had a chance to feed yourselves and have something to drink, have a little chat with one another, and discuss what we've gone through so far. I don't know about you, but I've been blown away so far at the content that's come out of these guys and the level of these talks. But it's not over yet. I've got plenty more to deliver for you, so keep your ears open. Now, our next speaker is an author, a speaker, and I think you'll agree after you hear her a lot better than I, a competitive ultra runner whom did 63 marathons in 63 days. I can't do 63 movie marathons in 63 days. Not only that, she also is a world record holder for her 4,044-kilometer run across Australia, to which she completed in 76 days. And if you're not flabbergasted already, I'll tell you a little something that she shared with me whilst I was hounding all of the speakers for information on their talks. And she told me how she came about to writing her talk. Now, this is someone that obviously, to do these sorts of feats, needs to train plenty. So she took herself out for a planned 2-hour hike, excursion, trail run, up a mountain, which turned into 5 hours of simply trying to stay alive. And in that time, most of us, I'm pretty sure you'd agree, would crumble like dry Ravita, but not this person. They took that time, and to keep themselves calm, they started conceptualizing this talk for you. And I don't know about you, but that is just mind-blowingly impressive. Now, I want to ask you, she did all this before starting an undergrad degree in sports and exercise psychology. Now, show our hands. Who in here thinks that's an incredible, just an insane amount of things to accomplish so young? Come on, just give me I can see you, like, that's crazy, isn't it? To do all of that before an undergrad. Okay, all right. Well, what if I was to tell you that this person is 58 years of age? Maybe that challenged your perception of what an undergrad is and what you can achieve at certain ages. And on a very personal note, I was thrilled to hear that someone would be taking on this topic. I myself joined Loughborough at 25. And for those of you that don't know, the boundary to be labeled a mature student is 21. Now, looking around the room, some of you will remember 21. And I don't know about you, but I certainly wouldn't have called myself mature at 21. So next up, with their talk, Nikki Love and Running into the Gap.
A couple of big things happened in 1967. First, I was born. Second, 2 women, Catherine Switzer and Bobby Gibb, lined up to run the Boston Marathon. In 1967, women weren't allowed to enter marathon races. They did it anyway. Their impact, Catherine's was loud, Bobby's was quieter, but both changed the story about women in endurance. The following year, I began my running career. I was a 10-pound pom who'd sailed to the other side of the world, and my first steps on Australian soil were to run like crazy in a park in Perth. A little girl whose future in running had been made more possible by the women who'd come before her. And in 2023, at age 56, I found myself back in Perth, ready to again run like crazy. But before I tell you about that adventure, let me fill in the gaps between Nikki, aged 18 months, and Nikki, aged 56. The story about women in endurance had begun to change,
Now all I had to do was grow up and see where my feet could take me. My teens were for schooling, my 20s for partying, my 30s for pregnancy, raising a child, and building an income as a single mum. My 40s were for building a business and dealing with everything that life could throw at me. And then came my 50s, and with them, perimenopause. And suddenly, science and society was yelling at me, saying, hold on, you're on the wrong side of the bell curve. You're in decline. I didn't like that story very much. I finally had the time and the space to see how far my feet could take me, and I was being told I was too late. Maybe I was raging against the machine, but at age 50 and at the start of my perimenopausal era, I decided to run 63 marathons in 63 days throughout the UK. Not many people believed I could do it. I was told I was too old, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't fast enough. I was also told that my name sounded like a porn star, which somehow meant I couldn't run marathons. Like Catherine and Bobby, I did it anyway. And much to the surprise of the non-believers, I got better at endurance. This was not a story of decline. This was a story of potential. And it got me thinking, maybe I don't have to follow this stereotype of a downward path. Maybe I could consider potential. Now, that's not to say I breezed through perimenopause. I absolutely didn't. I fractured my pelvis due to bone density issues. I battled with mood swings and brain fog. I was even misdiagnosed with depression. It was another one of my perimenopausal symptoms. It took me a long time to figure out what I needed to do to help me to move better, feel better, and cope during this time. But during this time, I also stayed curious about this potential. And I went on some training runs. I ran around Ireland, the length of Wales, across the Netherlands, and 1,000 miles in 40 days on a treadmill. It wasn't one of my funnest adventures, but it was training. And in 2023, at age 56 and still perimenopausal, I found myself back in Perth, ready to again run like crazy. This time, not just in a park, but across the entire country, from Perth to Sydney, 4,044 kilometres in 76 days, this time running an ultramarathon a day. Before the run, I did pitch a big global brand to help film the adventure, to showcase a midlife woman, the mindset of endurance, the extreme and beautiful outback Australia, and midlife as a launch pad rather than a limitation. The response I received was, sorry, we're looking for younger protagonists with more interesting backstory. That brand did support a younger male counterpart of mine. It did hurt, but it did something more. It highlighted this cultural blind spot. It suggested that as we get older, our stories become less relevant. And it doesn't just stop at sponsorship. As a woman who'd worked for 40 years in the fitness industry, I wanted to understand what the research was saying about women of my age. And what I mostly found were papers with the framework of decline. The words loss, frailty, reduction, risk being the main headlines. Very little about performance potential. And it's not that the research is wrong. We do decline over time. But if we only ever look at decline, we'll only ever see decline. So here it was, these blind spots and gaps. Because once upon a time, society said that women couldn't run endurance. They were wrong. Sports science said, if you study men, you can transfer that information to women. They were wrong. We were then told that women made research too complex. We could be ignored. That was both wrong and right. Women are complex, and as Dr. Stacey Sims says, women are not small men. Women need to be studied across their entire lifespan. So here were these gaps and blind spots that needed to be studied. Because if science doesn't study us, society won't see us, brands won't back us, and we will disappear into the abyss of decline. That's the gap I'm running into. Like Catherine and Bobby, I want to continue changing the story about women in endurance. Now, if you'd seen me running along the road in Australia, you'd have noticed nothing extraordinary about me. Just a woman in a hat, putting one foot in front of the other, seeing how fast she could run across the country. Sometimes I'd be making shapes as I run danced. Other times, the tears would be flowing as I tried to keep going. This was hard. It required all of my determination, persistence, resilience, commitment, and grit. These are the things that you don't see from the outside. These are the psychological levers that I believe have been my superpowers that have helped me get better at endurance with age. And these are the things that I developed through my less interesting backstory. I also had to rely on these other mind processes: self-love, self-compassion, and self-belief. Because as I ran along the roads in Australia, I often heard the truckies on their CB radios saying, there's a Sheila on the road. Is she mental, crazy, insane, mad, lost? Sometimes it made me laugh. I do say that I like to run like crazy, but other times it hurt. The previous year, a young man ran the same route as me. He was cheered, sponsored, made into a national hero, and rightly so. This was a tough gig. But my experience, my mental capacity, and my place on the road attempting a record was constantly questioned. And the thing is, I'm not an outlier. I look at other midlife women entering endurance events, excelling with distance and age. And some race stats shows that as the distance gets longer, the performance gap between women and men starts to narrow, with some women excelling beyond their male counterparts the longer and tougher the race. These are great headlines. So where's the research? Not how women compare to men, but how women evolve across their entire lifespan. Because we do go through changes and we do evolve, not just erode. These were these blind spots and gaps yet again. So at the end of Run Australia, I came back here, I went back to school. I'm now at Loughborough University studying sports and exercise psychology. I'm not a qualified researcher yet, but I am working towards it because I am passionate about closing those gaps. Because whilst Catherine and Bobby began to change the story in 1967, for the next 6 decades, women like me trained and competed through puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause with very little sports science on women, about women. Among the thousands of sports science studies, only 1 in 3 participants are women, and of those studies, only 6% are on women, about women. And less than 1 in 10 of those studies looks at women in midlife and beyond. And another interesting research result is that when women aren't leading the research, we're less likely to be included in it. And that matters because leadership shapes visibility, and visibility shapes care and society. The world has waited long enough. It is changing, and I want to be a part of that change. I recently graduated my perimenopausal era. I'm now entering my research era. My dissertation is looking at imposterism and self-compassion in sports settings because I've felt it. That quiet voice inside my head saying, I don't belong here, I've been let in by mistake. Because when society continually tells you you're the wrong demographic, you start to internalise it. And when science says you're on the wrong side of the bell curve, you're in decline, well, that becomes the narrative. And research suggests that imposter feelings don't come from weaknesses. They can often be driven by exclusion. So as you sit and listen to my experience, I invite you to consider where in your life are you being told you're on the wrong side of the bell curve, you're in decline. And to notice if there's a gap between what society is saying and what you still believe is potential within you. And if there is a gap, then I urge you to jump into it and do it anyway, because the world can't wait to know your potential. And so here is my hope, that the next generation won't be running into the same gaps that I've been running into as a midlife woman. That science will study us, brands will back us, and society will see us, not as complexities to be ignored, but as potential to be explored. And I also hope that in a couple of years, I'll be back here telling you more stories from my research era, because I am not slowing down. I am ramping it up. And next year, in my 60th year on the planet, I'm going back to Australia, and I'm running back from Sydney to Perth to stay curious about potential and to gather stories and evidence for future research. Because sometimes endurance doesn't end with age, it gets better. And if you only ever look at decline, you'll only ever see decline. But if you look at potential, now that's a story I do like. The world can't wait for women to be studied, seen, and supported. And that's a gap I'll keep running into until it closes.
That was phenomenal. Thank you so much. Can we give another round of applause, actually, for that one? I'm not playing favourites, I promise, but there was so much to be taken from that one, and I really hope that you've taken some key things away from that. Maybe it'll make you question the things you're told and are supposed to believe as if it's gospel. Maybe you'll start questioning some things, maybe start challenging yourselves. I certainly feel that way. And so unfortunately, I don't get a break from feeling a little bit little here, because I've yet another spectacular example of how little I've done and achieved in my life. But I'm thrilled to introduce them nonetheless, of course. This is an inclusive design specialist and a social entrepreneur. And I'm going to tell just a tiny little story of my own here. I actually met this speaker a couple of years back. We go way back. We've been first string connections on LinkedIn for 2 years. Yeah. And I do this thing. I go to the design show every year as if I'm some know-it-all, as if I have any authority in my opinion. And I pick people out and I go, oh, yes, you'll go far, kid. You'll do well. As if I know anything at all. But this is the second time this evening I was right. Because since adding them on LinkedIn, my feed has been a constant reminder of just how well this individual has been doing. Before that, actually, I didn't know a lot of these things before, and when I saw his work. But now I know that this speaker is a fellow neurodivergent, but a professional one. I'm not a professional neurodivergent. This speaker is a professional neurodivergent because they were listed on the Disability Power 100 list and recognized on that. So I think that speaks for itself. Not only that, but an RSA Student Design Award winner and a former founder of Incluse. And their work includes consulting people on inclusive design in communities and within their businesses. And I also didn't know that this individual is a cancer survivor, which I believe fueled their passion for championing inclusive design within products. So, without further ado, Robert McKenna, and Inclusive by Design, Why the Future Depends on Who We Include.
That one day you might not be able to use the products that you love. It's a scary thought, right? But that is the reality for billions of people across the world that live within a world that they find to be inaccessible. My name is Rob, and I'm an inclusive design expert and human factors consultant. And in the next 18 minutes, I'm going to prove to you why inclusive design is not just about disability. It's about you and the future of humanity. But for me to do that, I need to take you back to when I was at school. And when I was at school, I was a pretty weird kid. I came up with some pretty odd questions, the normal ones, of course, of why do I have to do homework? How do I get a girlfriend at an all-boys school? And probably the most interesting question of all, where do babies come from? But there was one question that lingered in my head throughout the entirety of my childhood, but I would never dare ask it. And that question was this. What would happen if I broke my leg? Now, I can see I'm losing some of you here, but stick with me on this. Let's be real. If you met somebody at school who had broken their leg or they'd broken their arm, they instantly became the most popular kid at school. They get people coming up to them saying, "Oh, you poor thing, can I sign your cast?" It used to annoy the hell out of me because I wanted to feel popular. I wanted to know what it was like to be somebody in that scenario. And in 2019, I got my answer. So let me take you back to the summer of 2019. I was ready to have the best summer of my life, to go traveling with my mates, to play as much cricket as possible, and to just have the best summer of my lifetime. And one day, I decided to go on a date with my girlfriend at the time. And we decided to go to the park, to a notorious contraption I'm sure you're all familiar with, known as a swinging basket. We decided to lay in this swinging basket as the afternoon drifted on, and eventually realized, as I was getting very sunburnt, that we probably should start setting off home. So we got out of the swinging basket and started walking down the main park path. But as I was walking along, entirely out of nowhere, a stabbing pain hit me in my groin region. I had no idea where this pain had come from, but it was so debilitating, I thought I was going to faint on the spot. Eventually, I hobbled home to where my mum saw the state that I was in and instantly took me to the GPs. From the GPs, I was sent with a letter to A&E, where after numerous examinations, I was told I would have to stay overnight. The next morning, I was whisked away from my ward bed to go and have an ultrasound scan on my groin and eventually brought back. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. A scene played out in front of me like that of a TV medical drama as 3 doctors came marching down the central part of the ward, came to my bedside, shut the curtain, with one doctor standing beside me. And I will never forget the words that doctor said to me. He said, "Rob, we have found that you have 2 lumps in your left testy, and we believe them to be cancerous." In that moment, my entire world turned upside down. I went from being such a free 18-year-old to being locked into doctor's appointments, having to go through surgery to remove my left testy, having to then soldier on through chemotherapy and feeling the most anxious and depressed I have ever felt in my lifetime. I felt as though I couldn't tell people how I was feeling. I felt excluded and misunderstood by healthcare systems and educational systems. I felt that I couldn't use products or do things the way I used to do them anymore. For the first time in my life, I truly felt like I was excluded by society. But funnily enough, this wasn't for the first time. Growing up as a young neurodiverse kid, living with dyspraxia, education in particular was really tough for me. Even when I was at school, I didn't actually believe that I had a disability. I just simply thought I was one of those kids that wasn't very smart. I'd struggle to understand simple instructions. I'd struggle to follow simple instructions. I'd struggle to do physical things like chopping an onion because of my weak wrists. I felt excluded by the products and the experiences that I would go through. Until one day I realized that I am not alone. In fact, I'm part of a community that is over 1.3 billion people across the globe living with a disability. That's 1 in 6 people, with 80% of those disabilities being non-visible. In the UK alone, we have over 16.1 million people that identify as being disabled, which means in this room tonight, around 12 to 25 people watching this talk will have some form of a disability. But more important than all of those statistics combined is a statistic that I truly hope you take away with you today to understand the essence of the message of this talk. And that stat is this. An estimated 83% of people acquired their disability later on in life. That means somebody in your family could acquire a disability. One of your friends could acquire a disability. Even you listening here today could acquire a disability in your lifetime. And when you become excluded from society, it means that you cannot live life the way you used to anymore. Now, people always rebuke this. They always say, but Rob, it can't possibly impact me. How could this affect me at all? But the truth is, one way or another, it will impact you. And I can prove it. We are living within a world where our global population is becoming more diverse year on year. And it is estimated that by 2050, over 3.5 billion people will need one or more assistive products in their lifetime. We are also living within an aging population. It is expected that by 2050, 1 in 6 people will be over the age of 65. With aging, this increases your chances of acquiring certain disabilities that may be related to vision, mobility, hearing, cognition, and chronic illness. Long-term conditions and chronic illnesses are also set to increase. It's expected that by 2030, here in the UK, long-term conditions like arthritis and cancer are set to double. This simply paints a picture of the world that we are heading towards. And if you bring in stuff like the climate crisis and the advancement of AI, it can all seem very, very, very scary. But do not worry, because I have hope, and I truly believe that there is a solution. A simple process known as inclusive design. But what actually is inclusive design all about? Inclusive design is not about just designing for those with disabilities. It's about designing with those people who are normally excluded from the product development process. And the funny thing is, this process has created numerous inclusive innovations, so much so, I can guarantee that you have probably used one today and not even realized it. Let me prove it to you. Firstly, with the humble curb cut, a simple innovation that was fought for by American disabled activists back in the 1970s, has now been implemented globally across the world in street architecture. Another simple solution is that of audiobooks. Audiobooks were originally created to empower those with visual impairments to have access to literature, but now is a global market worth over $8.71 billion globally. And lastly, a product you hopefully all use this morning is that of the humble electric toothbrush. The electric toothbrush was commercialized back in the 1950s to empower those with dexterity impairments, such as arthritis, but now is backed by Brits, as 67% of the British population prove that they want to go with an electric toothbrush over a manual one. This just shows that inclusive innovation is all around us. And for humanity to prosper, we must implement inclusion as a first principle. But I can hear the thoughts going on in your head. How do we do this? How do we practically do this as a society to create a truly inclusive world for all? I have compiled my own lived experiences and the lived experiences of hundreds of others who I've worked with through social enterprise escapades, through running my own inclusive design consultancy, through creating inclusive innovations at the likes of Unilever, and winning national and international design awards for my inclusive design work. I have formulated a 3-step framework that we can all utilize to truly adopt inclusive design into our world. And that framework is this. Firstly, we must educate. Secondly, we must test. And thirdly, we must co-create. Firstly, with education, it's all about looking to those outside of your echo chamber, engaging with diverse perspectives to truly understand what is their real world view. Secondly, like any good engineer or scientist, we have to test. We have to understand, with your product or system, who is being excluded. And more importantly, why is that person being excluded? And lastly, the most beautiful part of inclusive design is that of co-creation. When we look to co-create with those real individuals who are normally marginalized, we can truly create the greatest innovations that the world has ever seen. I truly believe that this process cannot be summed up better than by thousands of disabled activists' words from across the world. And that statement they use is this: it's nothing about us without us. Let me say that again. It's nothing about us without us. If inclusive design had been implemented within sustainable solutions like the creation of the paper straw, there would have been greater understanding that for many individuals with varying disabilities, they require the rigidity and the flexibility that plastic straws offer them, and that the soggy nature and the collapsing nature of paper straws could have been mitigated. In there lies an opportunity to create an inclusive, sustainable solution. And even as we head deeper and deeper into the development of AI, we must look to be inclusive. It has already been shown that due to biased data sets, that those with disabilities, when portrayed in visual image generation, are shown to be aspirational or hero shot-like, and not realistic to the prompt that the person has inputted. But I have already seen, through my own work of utilizing AI to build inclusive design tools for design teams, if we use AI inclusively to include those from social minorities, we can look to create the most brilliant physical and digital accessible solutions that the world has ever seen. Now, I've thrown a lot at you today, but let's bring this back to you. Why does this matter to you? And why does this matter today? We live in a world that is facing unprecedented climate challenges and the fast development and rise of AI. But so few people take great action against it. This is known in psychology as normalcy bias, where we as humans tend to not deal with a problem until it is on our doorstep. In so many ways, normalcy bias shows us that we do not truly understand who we are excluding until we become that person. In so many ways, we as humanity might not realize that we are destroying the world until it is too late. So take this chance today to stand up and fight for a world that is inclusive for yourself and for others. And if you won't do that, then do it for that young boy Rob. A boy who couldn't speak properly until the age of 5, who was told that he would fail all of his GCSEs, but now stands here speaking in front of you today with a first-class honours degree and national and international design awards to his name. And if not for him, then do it for that young teenage boy, Rob. A boy who felt so much pain, so much loss, and so much exclusion, but now is fighting to create a better world through inclusive design and is supporting social causes through his ultramarathon escapades. Because at the end of the day, there are so many billions of people out there who are just like me and want to feel included. You can be the catalyst for this change. You can be the person to stand up and fight for inclusion. You can truly be the people to change the world, to make it inclusive by design. Thank you.
I told you it was good, didn't I? Wow. I'm not sure. I sat there and I was, I'm not sure I can get back up and follow that, actually. Most definitely an incredible example of what one can accomplish despite labels. And then there's me, and I go, hey, look at me with my ADHD, and come up here and clown for you. No one was surprised by that diagnosis, were they? No, I didn't think so. But he's right. I didn't get a formal diagnosis until I was 27. And I sit there, and I think I was right to wait to hear these talks. And I think about the theme of this evening, and I think about the world can't wait. And I think about how every single talk that's been on this evening has resonated with me in some way or another. And what I really think is the world can't wait for us to start thinking about these things that have been brought to you this evening. You don't have to be black to change your perspective. You don't have to be a woman to appreciate the steps that are or aren't being taken there. I hope all of you feel the same way that I do, and that you go away starting to think more about sustainability, inclusivity, and so on. But now, we have LSU Sing to perform an a cappella performance for you of ABBA and Mama and Papas. Please take it away. Excellent. I have nothing on that. My karaoke shall remain a mystery after watching that. I'm not going to subject you to that. But I am going to have to speed things up a little bit, I think. I'm surprised no one's given me the hurry up and push me off stage yet. So I'm going to try and speed things up a little bit for you. So our next speaker has got another new opinion, I think, for a lot of people. And I'm certainly very excited and interested to hear exactly what she has to say. Now, we've got a doctor in the house, a doctoral researcher. Yes. Nigerian born and growing up in South Africa and then living in the UK, something I personally have never done, was born here and grew up here, so I'm interested to hear more about that gear change and what that was like for her. This person has written opinion pieces in newspapers on the black female experience, as well as appearing on radio interviews on Cape Talk Radio, rather. They talk about belongingness, internalized expectations, and unapologetic authenticity without compromise, which I think, regardless of where you've lived and where you've been, is something that we can all relate to. So, Dr. Tamun Odein Princewell with Tales of the Token, a black girl's journey to self-actualization. Thank you.
Growing up, being the only black girl in the room, or being one of the only black girls in the room, it wasn't just a thing of being different. It was a thing of being the exception to the rule, being a token. Now, of course, the experiences of black women across the world, they're not monolithic. Yet when you find yourself in certain situations, in certain spaces, where you're the only one who carries your difference, where your presence is both a statement and a question, there tend to arise certain shared experiences. So I'd like to share with you what I call Tales of the Token and my journey of self-actualization that has led to me existing as the truest version of myself. Now, for context, I like to say I was born in Nigeria, bred in South Africa, and I'm being buttered in the United Kingdom, with each of these moves evolving my sense of self and how the world saw me. Now, there's one vivid memory that stands out from my childhood in South Africa. I was in my final year of primary school, and my teacher, I believe she taught us English and natural sciences, she'd gone around the classroom asking students to state the high schools they would be attending the following academic year. And she would acknowledge each mention with an approving nod or a smile. And I should note that the majority of teachers at my primary school, they were white. And so when it got to my turn, I told my teacher the name of the school I'd be attending, a school that was predominantly a white, somewhat upper middle class institution. And to my disbelief, my teacher paused, turned to me, and in front of the whole classroom, she asked, "How did you get in there?" Her response, it was filled with shock, as if it was a feat I shouldn't have accomplished, as if it was a space that I'd stumbled into. And that moment, it stayed with me. It wasn't just about being different. It was about being seen as the one who was allowed in. Now, I should note that when I eventually started attending that high school, another moment of tokenism found me, so to speak. I was at one of the induction evenings when a parent approached me and ever so inquisitively asked if I was there on a scholarship. Again, my presence was questioned, as if my being there was an anomaly, as if I didn't belong, as if it could only be validated by somebody else's generosity. And these experiences, they made me acutely aware of how often people like me are seen through narrow, stereotypical lenses. And Black feminist scholars, intersectional frameworks, they introduce us to this concept called the intersectional invisibility of Black women. Now, intersectional frameworks, they're simply frameworks that recognize the ways in which various social categories, such as race, gender, etc., how they all reinforce one another to produce marginalized individuals and groups. And so the intersectional invisibility of Black women, it lies in their tendency to be less readily recognized as prototypical members of either their race or their gender. And prototypical, it simply refers to the ideal image that people hold on to. So for instance, in relation to women, that image would be white women. And in relation to Black people, that image would be Black men. So you can see how Black women, at the intersecting of their race and gender, are overlooked. But as I've grown, I have come to know what I call a paradox of being, in that yes, the world renders, perhaps assumes me invisible, yet in predominantly white spaces, as often the only Black woman in these spaces, I am hypervisible. I am seen and I am unseen, all at once. And there's one moment that cemented this paradox of being for me. It was during my earlier university years in South Africa. I was attending a social gathering with my friends, most of whom were white. And we had barely settled in when a white male loudly and boldly asked the room, "Why is there a Black girl here?" Although his phrasing was a lot more vulgar and explicit than that. But here's the thing, that question, it froze the space. My Blackness, already visible, now became a spectacle. Yet at the same time, I felt so small, as if I was a non-entity, as if my very presence was out of place. Now, shortly after that incident, I began a blog where I started detailing my experiences, my journey, navigating life at a university that had not too long ago been reserved for white South Africans. And soon after that blog, it turned into a regular opinion piece column in the student newspaper, where I transformed these experiences into reflections for other Black women and Black girls walking similar paths. And so my words, they became a testament of the resilience, the brilliance, and the undeniable presence of that Black girl in the room. Now, this paradox that I speak of, it doesn't only live in what is seen, it lives in what is heard. And so as a young child, when I moved from Nigeria to South Africa, I quickly learned that painful lesson that my voice could make me a target of physical and verbal bullying. And so to adapt, I learned to code switch. I learned to change the way in which I spoke, depending on where I was and who I was speaking to. And code switching is that instinct that many of us know too well, the way in which you change yourself, how you behave, how you act, how you speak, in order to fit into different spaces. And so I made sure that I put on the kind of accent that did not ask questions about where I was from. But here's the thing, regardless, no matter the likeness of my accent, Black women like myself existing in spaces of whiteness or in spaces we were historically excluded from are still too often silenced. And that too is a paradox of being, to have a voice, but not always a say. Now, of course, not every experience of tokenism has been agonizing. Some have been unexpectedly comical. I remember in high school, we studied Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And the novel, it is heralded as one of the most important pieces of African literature. And it is centered around its protagonist, Okonkwo, who is a proud Igbo warrior in pre-colonial Nigeria. And it details the experiences, the encounters that his community has upon the arrival of European missionaries. Now, the novel, it also details the recurring account of the breaking of the kola nut, which is a fruit off of the kola tree. And this breaking of the kola nut, it symbolizes respect, hospitality, community within Igbo culture and Igbo tradition. Now, although not Igbo myself, I was still the only Nigerian amongst my peers. And so my teacher, eager to bring the story to life, she asked if I could bring a kola nut to class. But in my childlike innocence and somewhat ignorance, I was unaware of the different types of traditional nuts and kola nuts that existed. And so instead of bringing the requested kola nuts, I brought what is known as bitter kola. And although holding some similarities with the kola nut, it is mostly known for its medicinal purposes. And as its name suggests, it is very well recognized by its extremely bitter taste. And that, as you can imagine, did not go down too well with my classmates. But here's the thing. My teacher's request, it was well-meaning, it was well-intentioned, but it still placed me in a position of representation where I was expected to embody and somewhat account for an entire culture that was not even my own to begin with. And that moment, it reminded me of the weight that being the only one in a room can come with. Now back to the more agonizing tales of tokenism. Once again, in my earlier university years, I shared a dorm room with a white South African female. And at some point, we were discussing places in the world we'd like to visit. And I believe she made mention to Budapest. And in my excitement, having been there a few years earlier as part of a choir tour, I told her how lovely it was and how much she would enjoy visiting the city. And to my shock, she insisted that I'd never traveled to Budapest. And then she went a step further to insist that I'd never traveled at all. A few moments later, I came to realize that the region she so strongly rejected that I was able to experience the world beyond her imagination was because she herself had never been out of the country. And so in her mind, she was the symbol for possibility and access. And it was impossible that I had achieved something that she had not. And you can imagine how taxing it would have been for me to continue a conversation with somebody that was so ingrained in their own entitlement and ignorance. And I could use this opportunity to discuss the historical tensions, the historical imbalances that are and that exist between the white female experience and that of the black female experience. But then we'd be here for a very long time. And so it wasn't until after several tokenistic experiences that I came to realize, that I came to understand how problematic it is to be labeled as the exception in systems and spaces of whiteness. To be the only black friend in a group is not an accomplishment. To be told you're not like the others, it is not a compliment. It is a subtle reminder that your presence is conditional, that your acceptance is rooted in what somebody else thinks is palatable. To be the only black woman in a space, it is not an achievement. It is a reflection of the systems that labels my existence in such spaces as something extraordinary to begin with. And that in itself is a problem. And so, if like me, you have found yourself existing in these spaces where you're both seen and unseen, where you have a voice, but not always a say, know this. You were never meant to exist as somebody's symbol of progress. You were meant to exist unapologetically, in your truest self, in all your richness. And so I do just that. I exist in all my totality and in all my fullness, without shrinking myself to fit into the confines of somebody else's ignorance. And that for me is self-actualization. That is resistance. It is a reminder that I belong, not because I was chosen to, but because I simply do. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent message and beautifully delivered. Cool. So I have one more for you. Okay. And I've saved the very best name for last on this one. Now, this is a current Loughborough University professor in organizational behavior with over 10 years studying in the field of neuroscience. So big old brain on this fella, definitely. Multiple published works as well, and along with a book entitled Neuroscience for Leaders. So definitely have a chat with him afterwards if you're in the business of business. I'm sure he's got some insights for you. And as a reminder, just to squeeze it in there, please don't forget about the networking session afterwards. Come along, have some chats with our speakers. Our speaker was also the recipient of the Benedictine Award for Outstanding Research in the area of crisis leadership. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but I'm sure he's going to flesh that out. The speaker that's coming up next makes Sean Paul look like Mr. Local, not Mr. Worldwide. Our speaker has delivered keynote speeches from the UK to Ukraine, from Greece to Hamburg, and he's here now to deliver brain adaptive feedback. Alexandros Saikagios.
What if I told you that your brain reacts to feedback in exactly the same way that reacts to a threat of a wild animal? Yes. Imagine your boss calls you and says, "Come from my office. I need to give you feedback from the project that you've participated, that you were responsible for." Your brain doesn't see any opportunity for learning. Your brain sees danger, danger in front. I want to go out of that. Today, I'm here to explain to you why that happens. And not only that, to give you a new way of how we can recalibrate the way that we give and receive feedback, taking insights from neuroscience, the science of the brain. I'm Alexandros Saikagios. I'm professor of organizational psychology, organizational behavior, and human resource management in Loughborough Business School. And among other things, what I like to do is to collect human brains. Well, not literally. But what I mean is that I try to investigate, to search how the brain behaves at work. Along with a group of other researchers from a variety of different places around the world, we try to give answers of how managers and employees, people inside organizations, behave the way that they behave. The answer lies on our evolution and, of course, on our brain. And we try to utilize on this knowledge, trying to see how we can rethink about leadership primarily, and in particular about feedback and other things that we're interested in. So let's make a first stop on leadership. Let's understand what leadership is. For many years, we think that leadership belongs only to one person, usually we call a leader. Nowadays, we know that a leader is just one part of what we call leadership. Leadership requires at least two. It's a social phenomenon. So the follower is almost equal as the leader in the leadership process. And if someone will ask me, where can I see leadership? I wouldn't say to him or her, you can see leadership if you observe the leader or the follower. What you need to do is to observe the interaction between the two. Because leadership is a relational process. Exists in the relationship between the leader and the follower. And it's not happening in a vacuum, but it's happening in a specific context. Every single time the situation is different, which makes the leadership process very challenging, very difficult, very unpredictable. So the human brain that likes everything to be predicted, asks himself, herself, what am I doing here, either as a leader or a follower? Do I belong here? What can I do in order to perform better here? This is what brain asks. And the question is how we can understand this better. And it's exactly the point that neuroscience can give us a new way to understand that. Neuroscience can give us a new language to understand how leaders behave, how employees, followers respond the way that they respond. And of course, how the context, the environment that all of us, we work together, we collaborate, influences this interaction, this relational process. Our brains evolve not to thrive in performance reviews, but actually to survive. We need to understand that. We are still at that point. Our brains need security. We need to maintain our status. We need autonomy. If we achieve these needs, then dopamine released in the brain and learning opportunities are opening. If we feel threatened, then cortisol is all around the place inside our brain and our bodies and would like to be protected. So the question is, what we can do? How we can recalibrate this? The first thing that we need to understand is how the evolution of our brain influences the way that we communicate, because in reality, feedback is communication from human to human, how we can become better. The first thing that we need to remember is that everything is about survival for the brain. The brain doesn't care if you are a CEO, a CFO, or a UFO in an organization. What the brain does care about is to keep you alive, and will do whatever it takes in order to achieve this target. The brain does this mainly, number two, through threats. Oh, unfortunately, yes. Threats are stronger than the rewards. Why? Simple. Because we have learned to survive mainly through threats. Rewards are also very important, very useful, and rewards are opening learning opportunities. So we need to move feedback towards rewards, not to see it as a threat. But how we can do that? I will explain that in a while. Number three, the brain needs certainty. Or to put it differently, the brain doesn't like uncertain things. So if feedback gives us something that it is new, something that changes the way that we behave, we are going to reject it. We're going to react negatively on it. And we need to understand that. It's a reaction of the brain, not a bad attitude that we have as human beings. The brain, our brains, conserves energy. A lot of things that we do every single day are in autopilots. The brain is a wise organ, doesn't put us to think about everything. But you know, these autopilots, they create our comfort zones. And comfort zones create safety, security. We know the path. And if feedback comes, and usually wants to kick us out of this path, we feel that something is changing. We feel that we're losing more energy, and the brain doesn't like this. At the same time, number five, the brain likes easy solutions. Simple things. Not to be confused. Confusion, it means insecurity, not safety, not survival at the end of the day. If the feedback, if the communication is confusing, is complex, then the brain will reject it, will react negatively on it. But the good news are coming with number six. This beautiful ability of the brain to modify part of itself that we call neuroplasticity. Yes, our brains, your brains, are plastic. They can learn. And this is exactly where feedback is hidden. This is exactly when we need, through that, to recalibrate the way that we provide and we receive feedback. But let's understand what is feedback. Feedback is not criticism, is not praise or judgment per se. You know, feedback in reality is exchange of information. Information that we need to understand where we are, what we do. Feedback is instructional and motivational. It gives us the way or the ways that we can improve what we do. But at the same time, motivational, how to become more engaged. But do you know what research suggests? No matter how much feedback you receive, what it does matter is how you receive it. So if feedback delivery is poor, your performance goes down 30%, just because it's not that it was the wrong feedback, it was the right feedback, but the delivery of the feedback was not the appropriate one. If the delivery of the feedback is good, then performance expands. Then we understand what we need to do. Then we become friendly with this ability to become better. And this is what it does matter. So let's understand why feedback matters, and actually why delivery of feedback matters. First of all, because through that, we have learned to survive. Not now, thousands of years now. Our pre-ancestors, they used feedback in order to learn. Eat the berry. Fire, hot but useful. Tiger, beautiful but bad. But also nowadays, In our modern societies, within our modern organizations, feedback, communication is extremely important in order to understand the gap between where we are and where we would like to be. That's also very important. So feedback gives us purpose to do things, to perform, and of course to bring results. But the question is, if feedback brings all of these positive things, why we see it in a negative way? The majority of us, if not all of us. The answer is hidden in neuroscience, in our brains. I can give you some arguments here. Because feedback, the brain perceives feedback as a social threat. And the impact is exactly the same with the physical threat. A harsh word from your manager can have the same response from your amygdala, a very important part of your brain, exactly the same as when you see a snake in the grass. Oh yes. Your face flashes. Imagine the snake. Your heart beats. And definitely you want out of here. You don't want to say, nice snake. It's exactly the same with feedback. People said to us when they had an experience of an uncomfortable conversation with their managers, with other peers in their job, do you know what they remember? They remember how they felt, not what was said during the discussion, which is extremely important to understand that. I wasn't feeling good during the discussion. I was feeling stressed, nervous. I wanted out of there. Do you know why? Because I was receiving things that actually make me to believe that I'm not good. We call this phenomenon as cognitive dissonance, which is actually the gap between where we think that we are and where we actually are. I believe that I'm good. What this guy tells me that I'm not? Of course I am. Why should I accept his or her opinion? And then we become more defensive, you know, fight-flight mode. More defensive. We want to actually skip the situation, this unpleasant situation. It's not a bad attitude. It's practically neural protection. Our brain protects us, protects our status, who we are. So the question is, can we do something about it? And here's the point that I have some good news. You know, a lot of us believe that we learn how to receive feedback primarily in a top-down mode. All starts from our early years. You know, first we receive feedback from our parents, our teachers, other relatives, academic professors, our bosses. So the idea is, what if I change that a bit? What if I make feedback to start not from the feedback giver, but from the feedback receiver? Research shows that when people, all of us, we go and ask for feedback, you know what is happening? We are much more open. We are prepared even to accept negative information about what we do because we asked it. We asked for it. It's so simple. We didn't let anyone tell us that I'm going to give you feedback. I want some feedback from you or what I do. Automatically, dopamine is all over the place and learning opportunities all over the place as well. So it is important to try to create, to cultivate this type of environments within the places that we work together or even within our social groups. It is extremely important to create this culture of asking for feedback. So the next question is how we can do that. Well, always I say, step by step. Start small. Low-stake topics. How was your meeting? Was your food okay? The light? I know, they sound trivial, but your target is to make the brain get used of this exchange of information. To make the brain don't see any danger in front, but to see opportunities. And step by step, you can build trust. And you can make people, including yourself, say, we are safe here. I can say my opinion, and I can be heard by others. In our research, we did a step further. The question is how we can facilitate even more this process of asking for feedback, this brain-friendly, brain-adaptive feedback process. And we ended up with 3 suggestions that I also suggest to you. Number 1, prefer informal rather than formal ways of communication. Informalize, as I like to say to the managers that I train in a variety of places around the world. Informalize the environment. How you can do that? Don't call me in your office. You know, call someone in your office. It's a pure demonstration of your authority, formal thing. Walk in the corridor. I would like to tell you something. Or let's go for a cup of coffee. I have something to discuss with you. Your target is not to make them happy. Your target is to make them feel comfortable, relaxing, not in danger, not in a threat situation. And to give them the opportunity to learn. Number 2, be specific from scratch. Okay, you can warm up a little bit the place. What happened yesterday with a game, Real Madrid against Barcelona or whatever, but not overdo it. You don't want to confuse them. You don't want to confuse the brain. Brain can be easily confused. What does he want to tell me right now? Why we need to discuss these things with him, with her? To the point. Help him, her, to understand how he or she can learn further. And number 3, during the discussion, explain the benefits that the person can have after listening your suggestions, your recommendations. You know, we are living in the era of explanations. One of the things that I say to my students, especially executive MBA students, is that the period of time that we say someone do something because I say so has passed forever. Do something because. So explanations, they can give us the ability to understand, okay, if I'm going to do that, then this is how it is connected with what I'm doing overall, and this is how I can support my team and overall my organization, my department, my groups of people, my friends, my family. Ladies and gentlemen, as I like to say about leadership, leadership is too important to be left to leaders. I say exactly the same thing about feedback. Feedback is too important to be left only to feedback givers. All of us, leaders, followers, people, team members, we have something to say and exchange information and progress and learn from each other. Because at the end of the day, leadership is not about place control, but leadership is about creating opportunities. And feedback, it's something through which we can create these opportunities of learning. So the next time that someone will say to you, can I give you feedback about this? Take a deep breath, smile, and say, yes, of course, but can I ask you for yours first? For yours first. Thank you very much.